There's been a mysterious stone structure discovered beneath the Sea of Galilee.
Something massive is hiding on the floor of the Sea of Galilee, and it has been there for 4,000 years. It is not a rock formation, and it is not a pile of random debris. It is a structure made of basalt boulders weighing over 60,000 tons.
According to the researchers, that makes it even heavier than most modern-day warships.
That is heavier than most modern warships. For centuries, people sailed right over it, fishing and swimming, completely unaware of what was lurking beneath them. But in 2003, a simple sonar scan revealed a dark shape that does not belong in the water. And the deeper experts look, the less sense it makes. A mountain where no mountain should be. It all started by accident. In 2003, a team of researchers was out on the Sea of Galilee. They were not looking for lost civilizations or ancient mysteries. They were just doing a standard survey of the lake bottom, checking the depth and looking at the sediment. It was a routine job, boring even. They dragged their sonar equipment back and forth across the water, watching the jagged lines on the screen that represent the mud and silt of the lake floor. But then the line jumped. On the southwest side of the lake, the sonar painted a picture that made everyone on the boat stop what they were doing. The lake floor is usually flat and smooth, but the screen showed a massive circular shape rising up from the bottom. It was huge. We are talking about something that spanned nearly 230 feet across. That is bigger than a Boeing 747. At first, they thought it might be a computer glitch or maybe a school of fish packed really tight together. But the signal was too solid. It was hard. It was dense. Nature creates random shapes. It creates jagged reefs or sloping hills. But this thing was a perfect cone. It stood 32 feet high, looming in the dark water like a sleeping giant. So, here is the deal. The researchers marked the coordinates, but they could not just jump in and start digging. It took time to organize a proper dive. When they finally sent divers down into the murky water, the mystery only got deeper. Visibility in the Sea of Galilee can be terrible. You are swimming through green, cloudy water and you cannot see your hand in front of your face half the time. But as the divers got close to the coordinates, a shadow loomed out of the gloom. It was not a mud hill, it was rock. Thousands upon thousands of rocks. They were basalt boulders. Basalt is a volcanic rock. It is heavy, dense, and incredibly hard. And these were not just pebbles. Some of these stones were over 3 feet long. They were stacked on top of each other, layer by layer, forming a massive cairn. Now, getting a few rocks into a pile is easy. But this was 60,000 tons of rock. Let's put that into perspective. That is twice the weight of the Eiffel Tower. It is heavier than most modern battleships. And someone, thousands of years ago, piled it all up right here. The divers realized something else that gave them chills. The stones were not cut. They were natural boulders, but they were not from the immediate area. They had to be brought here, and the way they were stacked was intentional. There was no way a landslide or a volcano did this. Nature is chaotic. This structure was calculated. Experts from Tel Aviv University and other institutions began to analyze the data. They realized that this structure is made of small basalt blocks and boulders. It is essentially a giant cone. The footprint of this thing is massive. If you walked around the base of it, you would be walking for quite a while. But here is where it gets crazy. The structure is currently sitting under 30 feet of water, but it was not built underwater. Humans in the ancient world were good at many things, but they were not building 60,000-ton monuments on the floor of a lake with scuba gear. This implies something huge about the history of the region. It means that when this thing was built, the Sea of Galilee was much, much lower. Or perhaps this spot was dry land entirely. This massive pile of stones was likely a monument that stood on the solid ground, visible for miles around. A dark, towering cone of black rock against the landscape. So, who built it? And why? To understand that, we have to look at the labor involved. You do not just wake up one morning and decide to stack 60,000 tons of rock with your friends. This requires a serious organized society. You need leaders, you need workers, and you need a food supply to feed those workers. You need a reason to do it. In the ancient world, you only built things this big for two reasons: to honor the gods or to bury the dead. But here's the catch. There are no doors. There are no chambers that the divers could see on the outside. It is just a solid mass of rock. It is like a vault that has been sealed shut for 4 millennia. The discovery paper published in the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology admitted that they had never seen anything quite like this in the Levant. They compared it to other ancient structures, but the size and the location make it unique. It is a complete anomaly. Everyone is obsessed with the pyramids of Giza or Stonehenge, but this thing in the Sea of Galilee is a puzzle piece that does not fit the picture we have of the ancient history of this lake. We usually think of this area in terms of the Bible, Jesus walking on water, the fishermen, the Roman boats. But this structure is way older than that. It was sitting there, silent and ancient, long before the Romans ever marched into Judea. The discovery sent a shockwave through the archaeological community. They realized they were looking at the work of a lost civilization, a group of people who were powerful, organized, and seemingly obsessed with basalt stone. And the deeper they looked into the stones, the more they realized that the Sea of Galilee is hiding a history that is much darker and stranger than anyone expected. What lies beneath those stones is a secret the water has kept for 4,000 years. The impossible math of the Galilee. Let's talk about the sheer effort it takes to build something like this. It is easy to look at a pile of rocks and think, so what? But when you break down the math, it starts to look impossible. We are talking about 60,000 tons of volcanic basalt. Basalt is one of the toughest rocks on Earth. It is dense and heavy. The stones used in this structure are about 3 feet across. Try to lift a rock that size in your backyard. You can't. Now imagine moving tens of thousands of them. And get this, the closest source for this specific type of basalt is not right next to the structure. While the area has volcanic rock, the specific boulders used here had to be quarried or collected and then transported. 4,000 years ago, they did not have trucks, they did not have cranes, they did not even have the wheel as we know it for heavy transport in this specific context. They were likely using sledges, rollers, and pure human muscle. If each worker could carry or drag a heavy load, you would still need hundreds of workers doing this every single day for years. This wasn't a weekend hobby. This was a national obsession. Experts estimate that it would have taken a dedicated workforce just to bring the stones to the site. Then you have the construction itself. You have to stack them carefully. If you just throw rocks in a pile, they spread out. They slide. To build a cone that rises 32 feet high and stays stable for 4,000 years, you need engineering knowledge. You need to know about angles and weight distribution. The crazy part is the location. Today, it is underwater. But back then, it was likely on the edge of the lake or on a dry plain that eventually flooded. If it was on the edge of the lake, the ground would have been soft. Muddy. Building a 60,000-ton weight on soft mud is a recipe for disaster. The structure would sink. But it didn't sink. It is still standing there. This means the builders knew exactly where the bedrock was. They knew how to prepare the foundation. They were not just stacking rocks, they were engineering a monument to last forever. Comparisons are often made to Stonehenge. Stonehenge is famous for its big sarsen stones, but the total weight of the stones at Stonehenge is arguably less than the total mass of this cairn in the Galilee. Stonehenge is about architecture and alignment. This structure is about sheer mass and presence. It is more like the ancient cairns found in Europe, but on steroids. So here is the deal regarding the society that built it. To support a project like this, you need an economy. You need farmers producing extra food to feed the builders who aren't farming. You need a government or a king to give the orders. You need a hierarchy. This tells us that the area around the Sea of Galilee in the early Bronze Age was not just a collection of small villages. It was a hub of power. It was a place where serious rulers held court. And that brings us to the question of why? Why expend all this energy? Why waste millions of calories of human labor to pile up black rocks? In the ancient world, heavy labor was a way to show dominance. If a king could force 1,000 men to move rocks, He was powerful. It was a flex, but it was also usually spiritual. Most scholars agree that a structure this shape, a cone or a cairn, is almost certainly related to burial or cultic worship. It looks like a tumulus. A tumulus is a burial mound. Throughout history, important kings were buried under massive piles of earth and stone to protect their bodies and mark their place in the landscape. But usually, a burial mound has a chamber, a hollow spot in the middle for the body and the treasures. Does this structure have one? The sonar cannot see through the density of the rocks clearly enough to spot a small chamber deep inside, and excavating it is a nightmare. It is underwater. Moving those heavy stones underwater is dangerous and expensive. One slip and a diver gets crushed. So, for now, we can only look at the outside and guess. But the shape is a dead giveaway. It screams monument. There is another possibility that some researchers have thrown around. What if it wasn't for a burial? What if it was a platform? Imagine the water level was lower but rising. Or maybe it was built on an island. A massive stone platform could have been the base for a temple. A wooden structure might have stood on top of the stones, long since rotted away. It could have been a place where priests performed rituals visible from the city on the shore. But here's the catch. The top is relatively flat, but it is rough. It does not look like a foundation for a building. It looks like the pile is the monument. This points us back to the cenotaph theory. A cenotaph is an empty tomb, a monument built for someone whose body is missing or to honor a god who doesn't have a physical body. Think about the psychology of the people who built this. They were working with the hardest rock they could find, basalt. It is black, it gets hot in the sun, and it is permanent. They wanted this thing to be eternal. They were fighting against time, and in a way, they won. Their wooden houses are gone. Their clothes have turned to dust. Their names are forgotten. But their pile of rocks is still there, confounding the smartest scientists of the 21st century. But this structure did not exist in a vacuum. Just a mile away on the shore lies the ruins of a city that was just as mysterious. A city that might explain who gave the order to move the mountain. The connection between the underwater giant and the city on the beach is the key to unlocking this entire mystery. Who ruled the Galilee coast? If you swim from the underwater structure toward the shore, you hit land near a place called Khirbet Kerak. In ancient times, this was known as Bet Yera. The name itself sends a shiver down your spine. Bet Yera translates to House of the Moon. This was not a small fishing village. In the early Bronze Age, roughly 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, this was a metropolis. It was one of the biggest, most fortified cities in the entire Levant. We are talking about 30 acres of urban settlement. That sounds small by modern standards, but in ancient times that was a massive capital. The people of Bet Yera were powerful. They built massive walls around their city, walls that were 25 feet thick. Think about that. Why do you need walls that thick? What were they so afraid of? Or what were they trying to keep inside? Archaeologists have been digging at Bet Yera for decades. They found paved streets. They found massive grain silos. They found pottery that was so unique it has its own name, Khirbet Kerak ware. It is beautiful, polished, black and red pottery. But here is the connection. The underwater structure is made of basalt. The city of Bet Yera is full of basalt architecture. The timeline matches perfectly. The pottery and the organic material found in the city date back to the exact same window of time that the underwater structure was likely built. It is almost certain that the people of Bet Yera are the ones who built the underwater monument. So, here is the deal. We have a city of the moon, and right off its coast we have a massive cone-shaped pile of black rocks. In ancient Near Eastern mythology, the moon god was a big deal. The moon represented the night, the cycle of time, and often the underworld. It is possible that the city was a religious center dedicated to the worship of the moon god, Yera. Could the underwater structure be a part of that worship? Some experts speculate that the cairn was a ceremonial center. If the water level was lower, this structure might have been on dry land, located just outside the city gates. It could have been the focal point for processions. Imagine thousands of people marching from the House of the Moon, carrying torches, heading toward this massive black pyramid in the twilight. It fits the vibe of the Bronze Age. They love dramatic, large-scale rituals. But there is another twist. The population of Bet Yera eventually declined and the city was abandoned. The question is why? Did the environment change? Did the lake rise and swallow their farmland? That would explain why the monument is underwater. If the lake levels rose rapidly, or if there was a tectonic shift that dropped the ground level, the water would have rushed in. The Sea of Galilee sits right on the Great Rift Valley. This is a fault line. The earth here is unstable. Earthquakes are common. It is very possible that a massive earthquake hit the region 4,000 years ago. Such an event could have liquefied the soil, causing the heavy stone monument to sink or the land around it to collapse below the waterline. It might have happened overnight. Imagine being a citizen of Bet Yera. An earthquake hits. Your massive stone monument, the pride of your city, is suddenly swallowed by the lake. The water turns churned and muddy. The people might have seen it as a judgment from the gods, a sign that the house of the moon had fallen out of favor. This geological instability adds a layer of tragedy to the story. The structure wasn't just a tomb, it became a tomb for the civilization itself. But let's look closer at the name Khirbet Kerak. In later times, the site was associated with different cultures, but the massive fortifications imply a warlike people. Some researchers have pointed out that the size of the stones in the underwater structure matches the Cyclopean masonry found in other parts of the ancient world. Cyclopean means the stones are so big that later Greeks thought only Cyclops, giants, could have moved them. And this is where the science meets the legend. Because the region around the Sea of Galilee, specifically the area of Bashan to the east, has a very specific reputation in the ancient texts. It wasn't just known for pottery and grain, it was known as the land of the giants. When you combine a city named after the moon god, a massive inexplicable stone pile, and ancient texts that speak of warrior giants roaming this exact territory, the picture gets very wild, very quickly. And that leads us to the most controversial theory of them all: when giants walk the Galilee. So, here is the deal. We have to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the giant in the room. Whenever you find massive stone structures in the ancient Levant that seem impossible to build, the local legends always point to one thing: the Rephaim. In the Bible, the Rephaim were a race of giants, and the region of Bashan, which is the Golan Heights right next to the Sea of Galilee, was their kingdom. The Bible specifically mentions a king named Og of Bashan. He was said to be the last of the Rephaim. His bedstead was described as being made of iron and was 9 cubits long. That is about 13 feet. Now, science does not accept the existence of literal 13-foot-tall biological giants. But we have to ask, why did the ancient people believe this? They believed it because they saw things they could not explain. They saw massive fortifications. They saw dolmens, stone tables scattered all over the Golan Heights. And they saw things like the underwater cairn, back when it might have been visible. To a simpler people coming later, looking at these massive black basalt constructions, the only logical explanation was giants built this. But there is a physical connection here that is hard to ignore. About 10 miles east of the Sea of Galilee, on the Golan Heights, there is another massive stone structure. It is called Rujum el-Hiri. Rujum el-Hiri is known as the Stonehenge of the Levant. It consists of massive concentric circles of basalt walls with a cairn in the center. It contains 40,000 tons of basalt. Notice the similarity? The underwater structure has 60,000 tons. Rujum el-Hiri has 40,000. Both are made of basalt. Both are in the same region. Both date back to roughly the early Bronze Age. It is highly probable that the same culture built both. Rujum el-Hiri is often linked to astronomical observations, tracking the stars and the solstice. It is also linked to burial. So, if Rujum el-Hiri is the Stonehenge of the land, is the underwater structure the Stonehenge of the sea? Some theorists, and this is where it gets wild, suggest that these structures were part of a massive sacred grid. They believe the placement of Rujum el-Hiri and the underwater cairn was intentional, creating a geometric pattern across the landscape. Could the underwater structure be the tomb of a high king? Perhaps the legendary King Og himself? Of course, the timeline for Og in the biblical narrative is later than the Bronze Age dating of the stones, but legends often recycle. The story of the giants might be a memory of the powerful, physically imposing warrior class that ruled Bet Yera in the Bronze Age. These people were strong, they were capable, and they were terrified of being forgotten. There is also a linguistic clue. The ancient word for the underworld in this region was sometimes associated with the watery depths, the ocean, the abyss, the deep. By building a massive stone cairn that might have been partially submerged or right on the water's edge, were they trying to bridge the gap between the land of the living and the chaotic waters of the underworld? Was this a seal, a heavy stone cap to keep the spirits of the deep from rising up? It sounds like a movie plot, but ancient people took this stuff seriously. They believed the sea was a place of chaos and monsters, Leviathan. Placing a 60,000-ton order and stability, the stones, onto the chaos, the water, was a powerful magical act. The fact that it is a cone shape is also significant. In many ancient cultures, the bin stone, or the primeval mound, was the first land that rose out of the chaotic waters of creation. By building a stone mound, they were recreating the creation of the world. But let's ground this back in reality. Even if giants didn't build it, the people who did were giants of industry. They mobilized an entire population, and then they vanished. The Bronze Age collapsed. Cities were burned, trade routes stopped. The knowledge of how to build these things was lost. And as the climate changed, the water rose up and swallowed their greatest achievement. For thousands of years, fishermen cast their nets over the top of this giant's tomb, complaining about their nets getting snagged on the rocks below, never realizing they were snagging on the legacy of a lost empire. The silence of the lake. So, why is it underwater today? This is the key to understanding the timeline. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake. Its levels fluctuate wildly even today. A few years of drought and the shoreline recedes. A few wet winters and it rises. But over the course of 4,000 years, the changes are drastic. Geologists know that there have been periods where the lake was much lower. During the time this structure was built, the climate was likely different. There might have been a mega drought that lowered the lake, exposing the lake bed. The builders seized this opportunity. They went out onto the dry mud flats and built their monument. They likely thought the water would never come back. But the climate is a cycle. The rains returned. The outlet of the Jordan River might have been blocked by tectonic activity or sediment, causing the lake to fill up like a bathtub. Slowly, year by year, the water crept up the sides of the basalt cone. First, it covered the base. Then it covered the middle. Finally, the waves lapped over the peak and the structure disappeared from view. It sat in the silence and the dark, preserved by the fresh water. The discovery has opened up a Pandora's box of questions. Archaeologists want to excavate. But how? Underwater archaeology is slow and expensive. You can't just bring in a bulldozer, you have to use suction dredges to remove the silt between the rocks. You have to document every stone. There is a plan to investigate further, but it is tricky. The structure is protected. It is a heritage site. But the desire to know what is inside is driving everyone crazy. Is there a burial chamber in the center? If there is, and if it is sealed, it could contain organic material. Bones, fabric, wood, things that could be carbon dated with perfect accuracy. We could look into the face of the person who ordered this to be built. Or we might find nothing, just solid rock all the way through. If it is solid rock, then the purpose shifts back to being a platform or a marker. But here is the catch. Even if it is just a pile of rocks, it rewrites the history books. It proves that the society here was more complex than we thought. We often look at history as a straight line of progress. Cavemen, then simple farmers, then us. But discoveries like this show that the ancient world had peaks of greatness that were lost. They had capabilities we underestimated. The Sea of Galilee anomaly, as it is sometimes called, is a reminder that the Earth is still hiding things. We have mapped the moon better than we have mapped some of our own ocean and lake floors. This structure has survived wars. It survived the Romans. It survived the Crusades. It survived the Ottoman Empire. It sat there quietly while history raged above the surface. And the crazy part is there might be more. If the water was low enough to build this, what else is down there? Are there houses? Are there other monuments? Is there a whole complex buried under the silt that the sonar hasn't seen yet? So, what do you think? Was this a tomb for a giant king, a platform for a lost temple, or something else entirely? It is crazy to think about what else is down there. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's mysteries, smash that like button and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one.